1990, a film was released that explored the darkest corners of human nature, showcasing the fragile balance between civilization and savagery. Or at least, that's what they attempted to release. You're listening to The 90s Weren't Real, and today, let's discuss Lord of the Flies. A British author named William Golding released the novel Lord of the Flies in 1954. The plot centres around a group of British boys stranded on an uninhabited island and the many ways they attempt to govern themselves. The book was given its first film adaptation in 1963, a Filipino version in 1975, and then remade in 1990. If you're looking for the most book-accurate movie version, you should watch the 1963 film. However, I want to discuss the 1990 version specifically. The movie begins with an aircraft carrying 24 military schoolboys. It isn't explained what goes awry, but the plane ends up in the Pacific Ocean. The pilot, known as Captain Benson, is the only adult survivor. He is severely injured and delirious, but the boys help him to shore. The movie establishes quickly that Ralph is the group's natural leader. Though another boy named Jack has his name thrown into the vote too, it's clear early on that tension will rise between the two characters. The movie is anything but subtle, to be quite honest with you. I have to be honest too, I hated Jack immediately. There was just something about his character that I knew was going to annoy me throughout the movie, and I was completely right by the time we got to the end. But that's kind of the point. You're supposed to root for Ralph and despise Jack. I just somehow magically knew before we got to the point of why we should despise Jack. The problem is that I was also kind of indifferent toward Ralph. He's supposed to be their leader, someone they felt that they could trust, but to me he just seemed kind of naive and gullible and would just go along with what our other characters wanted anyway, so what's the point of him being a leader if he's so easily influenced or swayed? I don't want to get too much into it because we haven't gotten to like the nitty-gritty part of the film, but all of this will eventually make sense. Both of the main characters are not particularly great at portraying why they're the main characters, nor do they have the nuances that I think the 1963 version of the film provides you with as the viewer, but there's a lot of things that this movie gets wrong along the way, to be fair. The injured Captain Benson gets some rest on the island whilst the boys explore the surrounding area. They find fresh drinking water, a hill to set a fire, using one of the boys' glasses to signal any passing aircrafts that might see them so they know where their whereabouts is. It grows out of control though and burns down a nearby tree, which I don't know if that's kind of foreshadowing the downfall of the group as a whole, but it definitely felt like it was a moment you were supposed to pay more attention to. They just didn't really drive home the point of it enough for me to know whether it was foreshadowing or not, but it probably was. Jack becomes a kind of hunter within the group. He becomes obsessed with killing a pig that they see roaming around in the jungle, which again, the obsession kind of thing is probably foreshadowing too, but this movie just doesn't delve deep enough for you to know. And one night he takes a portion of the group to search for food, and this leaves no one to watch over the fire that they've set for any passing aircrafts, and it doesn't stay alight. A helicopter passes on by and they have no indication whatsoever that there's anybody on the island, so nobody comes to collect the boys. Nobody knows that anybody's there, basically. Ralph then confronts Jack for not keeping the fire alight and how it meant them missing an opportunity to be rescued, basically. And they fight about it until Jack concludes that he needs to leave Ralph's group and form his own group instead. He takes some of the boys with him, or rather they kind of just follow him along because, again, none of these characters really have personalities beyond Ralph and Jack. They're kind of just following along, or there's like one character maybe who they call Piggy, who has a little bit of a character, but everybody else is kind of forgettable, to be honest with you. But anyway, he takes some of the boys with him. They defect, basically, and more of them continue to defect to Jack's group throughout the movie. Meanwhile, the pilot, who was just resting, he runs off into the jungle. He's absolutely delirious, doesn't have a clue what's going on. He's dehydrated, probably suffering from internal injuries from the crash of the plane. And he enters a cave, slumped over, groaning from his pain, which causes a lot of noise. Two of the boys, Sam and Eric, who I think are twins, but I'm not 100% certain, they see the pilot in the dark cave and mistake him for a beast. Even though there's no indication prior to this that there is a beast on the island, they just come to this conclusion. They stab him with a knife and then run away. They inform the rest of Jack's group, which gives everyone but Jack anxiety. Jack seemingly just doesn't care, to be honest with you. He just kind of has that vibe throughout the movie, to be completely honest. Jack and his group then foil a plot to steal Piggy's glasses, who is the boy that they used to light the fire. However, they destroy one of the lenses instead, and this whole debacle caused one of the absolute worst crying scenes I've ever seen in any movie ever. It's also when I realized that Ralph is a total bitch. He just allowed Jack to walk right up on his camp and terrorize all of his friends who he still has, because there's not many people in his group. Ralph has nobody behind him at this point except Piggy and maybe two other characters. And they're the only ones that's loyal to him. And he's supposed to be their leader, mind you. And he just doesn't stop Jack whatsoever. He just lets him trample all over his friends. What a bitch. It becomes clear that Ralph wants to be rescued. He's very desperate to be taken away from this island and to get back home. He wants to leave. Jack, on the other hand, doesn't. Again, he doesn't care. He's very happy to stay on the island and just rule over the boys with an iron thumb. He thinks that he's the king of this island, basically. He doesn't think that anybody's going to come between him and ruling over this land. He believes it belongs to him. He's a very entitled person. He becomes power hungry and overbearing, and his group adapt to shave down spears, and they have this really weird face paint to make themselves appear intimidating, even though they're only these little scrawny children who anybody could easily overpower if, they truly tried. I'm sure if Ralph wasn't such a bitch, he probably could beat the shit out of Jack. He probably could beat up all of his group. But Ralph's just not that kind of guy, and that's where the movie gets it wrong. They make Ralph appear to be too much of a good guy whilst making Jack too much of a bad guy. You need a kind of balance. Your good guy can't be getting ran over like this or getting treated like he is a bitch the whole time, because then you just don't care. There's no actual tension being built there. It's basically just Jack being this absolutely insane crazy person who wants more and more power, whilst Ralph is yeah, no, I just really want to go home and see my parents, and that's just not fun to me. There should be some form of power struggle there, and it never comes throughout the movie. The group that's been following Jack, they do kill the wild pig that he was obsessed with, and they cut off its head in probably the only really graphic scene in the movie. I was expecting a lot worse from this film, put it that way. They placed the pig's head onto a spike and they put it in front of the cave where the two boys thought that the monster was living, and they call it an offering, but I don't know why they think this beast that they saw would care about a dead pig's head. But again, there's no elaboration on this. There's no context given. It's just kind of there. It's just a scene in the movie. They don't go into detail as to why the boys feel like they need to do this. Meanwhile, Ralph's group narrows down to just 3 members. There's Ralph, Piggy, and a boy named Simon, who is kind of independent anyway. He doesn't really care for either group. He'd rather just be alone and be with his thoughts, pretty much. Hence why he ends up wandering off into the jungle at one point, and he comes across the rotten pig head on the stick, and he decides that it's the best idea to explore the cave with a glow stick, and he discovers Captain Benson is dead. Throughout the movie, there's little snippets of scenes where I think it's implied that Simon is having night terrors about Captain Benson, but again, this doesn't go any further. There's no further context. It's just there. It doesn't get expanded upon, and then the reveal of it being Captain Benson in the cave instead of a monster just doesn't fulfill you as a viewer. It just kind of makes you think, well, I could have seen this coming because I haven't seen Captain Benson at the camp in days. We haven't seen him around. Of course he's the beast, so to speak, in the cave. It's just not interesting. But Simon realizes that the boys have mistaken Captain Benson for a monster and they have murdered him, ultimately. So he runs off to the beach to alert everybody of his discovery, and the two groups are in the middle of an argument for whatever reason. No context is given again. The glow stick in his hand spooks both of the groups into believing that Simon's the monster. No idea how they came to that conclusion, but they did. So they proceed to stab him to death too with their spears. Ralph and Piggy both partake in this, and they conclude that perhaps they're no different to Jack's group because they were able to kill Simon so quickly without even thinking about it. Jack then tells his group that the monster could return at any point. It can come in multiple different shapes or forms. So they continue to be anxious about it, but they're ready for another attack if the monster would return. They also, once again, plot to steal Piggy's glasses for some reason, except this time they are actually successful. Piggy and Ralph then travel to Jack's camp and they try to call a meeting using the conch that they had found earlier in the movie that for some reason was agreed upon being a speaking signal. This whole conch thing is just a part of the movie at the start and then it's forgotten about for the majority of the movie and then comes back towards the end. To be honest with you, when this scene came up where they brought the conch with them to Jack's camp, I had forgotten that this was part of the movie, and so I had to go back and watch the beginning and be like, oh right, they agreed that whoever is holding the conch gets to speak. A lot of the stuff from this film doesn't get elaborated on. It doesn't go any further than just the basic amount of storyline needed to progress, and even then, the progression that you do get throughout the movie is just so uninteresting. This is objectively just not a good movie, but you know. So Jack's group sees this conch and they don't give a fuck, basically. They've lost their minds by this point. So Ralph and Piggy are talking to the wind, pretty much. They don't care. So a part of Jack's group pushes this big boulder off of a cliff and it lands on Piggy's head. And of course, if you push a boulder on top of somebody, they're going to die instantly. So he does. And I was super grateful for this moment because, again, he provided me with one of the worst crying scenes that I've ever seen earlier in the movie. And I just thought that Piggy's character as a whole was just insufferable. So as much as it's awful, I was kind of glad to see him dead. And that's not even the point of the movie. You should not feel glad that the good guys are dying. You should feel terrible that that's happening. But because this movie does such a bad job at putting the characters across, I just didn't care. I was like, well, I'm kind of glad he's dead because he's just not interesting. He's insufferable. He's not at all a good character. He's just there. He's just a guy, pretty much. They then chase Ralph away from their camp, but for some reason Sam and Eric, I guess, have a conscience by this point, even though they didn't previously and didn't care that Piggy had just died. And they warn Ralph that Jack's group planned to kill him too later on. So the following morning, Jack and his group begin lighting fires throughout the jungle to force Ralph out of hiding, even though I don't even believe he was hiding. I think he was just at his original camp. They could have very easily found him had they just checked it. I don't know. He dodges and evades them by running towards the sea, falls at the feet of a US Marine who has landed on the island for some reason, I guess, because this, again, is not elaborated on. You don't see any planes flying above. You don't see any helicopters or anything like that. You don't even actually hear any form of, like, landing from an aircraft, which I don't know if you've ever seen an aircraft land or you've been near an airport or anything like that, but they're pretty loud. I feel like all of this time, like while these fires are being lit, both groups, both Ralph and Jack's group, would have known that something has just landed on the beach, but you just don't hear anything. So Ralph falls at the feet of this US Marine. he sees the fire engulfing the island. Jack and his group are behind Ralph because they're chasing him, and they see the Marines on the beach. They stop what they're doing, and there's like a slight moment where they seemingly reflect on their chaotic behavior, but to be honest with you, it again comes across as if like they're more upset about the fact that they've been found. They're more upset about the fact that they now have to go home. The worst part about this movie, by far, and I know I've done a lot of complaining throughout this episode, because this movie gets you absolutely nowhere. When it should, because the book is phenomenal. The first movie, the 1963 one, is a lot better of a representation of the book. This movie sucks ass. This is very bad. But the worst part of the entire thing, you do not, after all of this, they killed Piggy, they killed Captain Benson, they've caused deforestation at this jungle, which in this kind of, you know, in 2023, that would be a crime against everybody with the whole climate change situation going on. I'm sure they caused some of this, you know, because they went on a set, they traveled out to a place to film this movie. I don't know where, but they did. The worst aspect of it is you don't see any form of comeuppance for anybody. Jack does not get his ass beat by Ralph, first of all. That is a crime, because Jack deserves his ass to be beat, to be honest with you. He's a little bitch. He's terrorizing everybody. He's a power-hungry bitch, okay? But the Marines don't even, like, you know, put him in cuffs. They don't say, like, you're under arrest, son. We're gonna have to take you away. No, they just kind of stand there, look at all these boys, and are like, wow, you guys have been here this whole time? That's crazy. They don't actually speak, the Marines, I must say, but that's kind of how I imagine the conversation went. They don't care. There's no, like, comeuppance. There's no... You don't get the satisfaction of seeing what is going to happen to Jack. And that is where I found a major flaw in the movie. Like, the whole thing is pretty badly done. But having no comeuppance for Jack, that's too far. You can't have a character who is just bad throughout your whole movie, is doing all of these terrible things, and then you don't see him, like, go to jail. You don't see him get arrested. I know he's a child, but I would have liked to have seen him in a jail cell, is all I'm saying. I would have liked to have seen him in that orange jumpsuit, you know? Because he deserves it. He's killed people. People, as in plural, multiple. And just nothing comes of it. You want to know why I watched Lord of the Flies? I was watching the documentary about the Woodstock 99 festival. And they were like, oh, it eventually turned out to be something like Lord of the Flies. So here I was thinking, damn, Lord of the Flies must be like one of the most chaotic movies ever. It must be crazy because the thing that happened at Woodstock 99 was insane, you know? So here I am, just innocently pulling up the movie Lord of the Flies, thinking I'm about to be in for a real experience. I'm about to be in for something crazy. And then it turns out the movie just fucking sucks. So from now on, when people compare something to something else, I need them to be serious about it. Or I need them to be more clear. Because had they specifically said, oh, it turned into Lord of the Flies from 1963, I would have just watched the 1963 version. But instead, I watched the 1990 version thinking, oh, well, time had progressed. You know, maybe they had better CGI, maybe they had, I don't know, better writers and all this kind of stuff by this point. No, it got significantly worse somehow. It got worser. You know? Like, it's just, it's so bad. It's so bad. I was really hoping to record this episode and, like, have a movie that I would recommend to people. But if you've seen a movie where a kid does a crazy thing, like, what's a movie where a kid does a crazy thing? I don't know. Maybe, like, Chucky, but Chucky's not really a kid because that's a doll, but, like, he kills kids, I guess. Maybe. I don't know. Does he kill Andy? I think he does kill Andy. I don't remember, honestly. I might have to watch the Child's Play movies again to forget this goddamn film. But anyway, any movie where a child does something crazy is much better than this. you know? Or you can just, I don't know, ask your friend who has children what's the craziest thing their kid has done, and they'll have a better story for you than whatever the fuck this movie tried to tell you. This movie sucks ass, okay? Yes, there's a lot of killing, and yes, there's a lot of fire, and there's a lot of kids doing dumb shit. But it's just not entertaining, it's not fun, you know? If you ask your friend and they tell you, oh, my kid accidentally put my window out once because they threw their toy at it, that's funny, you know? Sad for the window, but it's funny. This is dog shit. So, if ever you're sitting down and somebody's like, oh yeah, I really like this movie, Lord of the Flies, it's from 1990, punch them in the face for me. You know? Because they deserve it, because this movie is so bad. Don't actually do that, please. I don't want to get sued. But still. Maybe next time I'll have a movie to suggest to people to watch. But for now, just trust me when I say that this movie's bad. You can go watch the 1963 version. I'm sure, you know, you'll probably find some form of enjoyment in that one. But this? Don't do this. Don't do this.